AI is going to cure all disease.
I am convinced that someday I will be able to ask an AI to cure cancer.
It's something that you hear a lot as the justification for why we need to be building as powerful an AI as possible, as quickly as possible. And I can see why it's so tempting. In fact, I spent a year of my life trying to get into the field of AI for medicine because I found it so promising. But recently, a paper that I've read made me start to question whether we really are on track to build AI that's going to, for example, cure cancer. Perhaps we're not as limited by raw intelligence as I thought, and instead we're limited by something else. And by focusing on the wrong thing, we're kind of costing ourselves time. I almost did actually get a job in that field, and last minute I kind of decided that there were more qualified people with a biology background who would be able to do a better job. But I didn't stop believing in it, because I do really think that some of the things that AI has managed to achieve in medicine are already pretty incredible. So let me tell you about one of the success stories. There is an AI drug discovery company called Incilico Medicine, and they have a drug called rentosertib, which treats a, by all accounts, very horrible condition called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a chronic scarring condition in your lungs, which is fatal usually within 5 years. And so having a new drug for this condition would be literally life-saving for people. This drug is not yet through stage 2 of clinical trials, so I'm not claiming that it's going to work for sure. But getting a drug even to this stage is actually really impressive. And that's because of how traditional drug discovery works. Basically, it's a giant funnel, a very time-consuming and expensive funnel. Here's how that goes. The first step in this pipeline is called preclinical research. And the very first thing you want to do is pick a disease and then try and figure out what proteins are involved in either causing it or worsening that condition. So here's one thing I didn't really understand until I started looking into all this stuff, but proteins are pretty much implicated in everything in the body. They do most of the functions in the body. So if you can find a target protein that's implicated in the disease, that is a big first step, because that will be the target that your drug is trying to fix. Okay, so how do we find a target? Well, this is really hard. Traditionally, this comes from years of academic research, where researchers will compare, let's say, healthy tissue with unhealthy tissue to try and figure out which genes are implicated, which genes are transcribing, etc., etc. So it is a very, very tedious process to try and find a target. This stage often takes 1 to 3 years on its own because it takes such a long time to show that there really is a causal link between a particular protein and a disease. Now, this is the first stage that Incilico did something quite different. They used a massive amount of data, including omics data, so stuff like genomics, and also papers and grant applications and things. And their AI platform was able to ingest this massive amount of data and propose a particular protein as a target. Now, the thing is that this data was already available to human researchers and researchers using current tools, but it's such a massive amount of data that it is sort of hard to see the signal in that whole sea. But that is something that AI can do fairly well. And so they proposed that TNIK is a protein that is implicated in this disease. Okay, so you found a target protein, but the next step is that you want to find a molecule that can do something to this protein. The way that this is traditionally done involves a lot of brute force. So this company might have a library of thousands, if not millions, of chemical compounds that it will test against this protein. Apparently, this is usually done by robot arms. I think that's very cool, but as you can imagine, it still takes a really long time to do because of just how many molecules you're trying to test. But eventually you will get a bunch of hits. So these are molecules that seem to do something to your protein. But a hit is not a drug. You see, the hit might be toxic, or it might not dissolve in water, or it might be destroyed by the liver. And so what the chemists at the company then need to do is they need to tweak that molecule until eventually they improve all of these properties and make it more drug-like. Most of the hits are just not going to work out. But over the course of, let's say, another couple of years, the chemists will find some molecules that could potentially be a drug. Then those molecules are put through mandatory safety testing, which involves 1 to 2 years of testing on animals like rats and monkeys and dogs, as well as a bunch of other safety tests. So all up, before you've tested on a single human, you've already spent like 5 to 8 years developing these drugs and testing thousands, if not millions of molecules. And that is very expensive. So let's see how Incilico did it differently. So instead of going directly to the point where you're testing a whole bunch of molecules in the lab to see if they hit your target protein, the idea with AI medicine is to try and design molecules that are more likely to hit that target protein on a computer first. There have been massive breakthroughs on these AI molecular design tools. The biggest is probably AlphaFold, which you might have heard of. But they aren't perfect, so it's not like you can perfectly predict which molecule is going to react with your target protein. You still do need to test it in the lab afterwards. But the point is, instead of testing thousands of chemicals, you could be testing far fewer. And so the whole process could take a lot less time. According to Incilico, this whole process only took about 18 months. They tested only 80 molecules. So the cost of this preclinical research was about 1/10 of what it would have been traditionally. And the benefits don't stop there. The next stage is called phase 1, and this is where you're not trying to figure out if the drug works, but you're just trying to figure out if it's safe in humans. So you give the drug to humans who are perfectly healthy and see what effect it has on them, if any. It's very early days for AI in medicine, so only about 24 drugs designed by AI have even gotten to phase 1. But of that 24, there is some slight evidence that they are slightly more likely to make it through phase 1 than non-AI drugs. The caveat is, of course, this is a very small sample, but it does seem like maybe AI is better at predicting the safety of molecules, which helps them go through phase 1 slightly more often. But this is where AI seems to hit a wall. You see, all of this stuff is, of course, time-consuming and costly, but it's nothing compared to the clinical phase, especially the phase 2 and phase 3 trials. It costs a lot to run these, and most drugs will end up failing. In fact, 90% of drugs will fail in the clinical trial phase. When you account for the cost of all of the failures along the way, every drug that comes to the market on average costs between $1.5 billion and $2.5 billion each. The preclinical part, the part where AI definitely seems to be making a difference, only accounts for about 1/3 of the total time and a bit less than 1/3 of the total cost. So it's really the clinical part that is the real bottleneck in drug discovery. And yet, so far, we haven't had much evidence that the AI tools really help with that. This drug from Incilico Medicine is currently halfway through phase 2 trials, but we have good reason to think that AI might not really help accelerate this part of the pipeline. To understand why, let's think about an analogy. Imagine a genius locked in a room with internet access. This genius is supposed to be like a general superintelligence. Like imagine ChatGPT, but like much, much better. Now, how useful is that actually going to be in medicine? Well, for some types of science, it seems like it would actually be very useful. Like in my own field of quantum mechanics, if you gave it the rules of quantum mechanics, it would probably be able to derive a lot of different theorems about quantum mechanics, like, for example, how quantum computers work. It might be able to discover new quantum algorithms, and that all seems very useful. But in medicine, there's a very different constraint. So yes, textbooks about biology are on the internet and therefore are part of the training data of this genius. But does that really help? I think one example that really opened my eyes is mitosis. Mitosis is the process of cell division, which you might have learnt about in high school biology. And given it's in a high school biology textbook, I figured it must be very simple and we must understand it completely. Wrong. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of proteins involved in that process where we don't really have any clue what they're doing. And so if the genius was trying to figure out something about mitosis, they wouldn't be able to do it from their locked room because there's so many unknown unknowns. Like, we just don't even know what the proteins involved really are. And so how would they be able to figure out what they do? To do that, you would actually need to do experiments, and from those experiments, gather data. So in some lucky circumstances, human beings have done those experiments. One great example is the data behind AlphaFold. The AlphaFold AI algorithm is trying to solve a fairly simple problem in biology. You take an amino acid sequence, and you know that this string is going to form a protein, but when you put it in water, how is that protein going to bend? Like, will it fold up in a crazy shape like this? Predicting this shape is so important because of how vital proteins are, and their function is often related to, for example, where they have pockets that molecules can bind to. So knowing the shape a protein is going to fold into is super useful. The problem seems simple, but it wasn't easy to solve. In fact, for 50 years, humans collected data about specific proteins, and they would figure out what their protein structure looked like with painstaking experiments. In fact, one of my friends did his PhD in biophysics, and he said that there were people in his department who had spent their entire PhD just trying to find out the structure of a single protein. Now, all of that data gathered using blood, sweat, and tears was put into what's called the Protein Data Bank. This is an incredible resource, and it's only because it existed that people at DeepMind were able to take that data and figure out how an amino acid will fold up into a protein fairly accurately. This breakthrough was called AlphaFold, and honestly, I think the algorithm is very, very beautiful. I was super impressed by it, so I made a bunch of videos about how it works. So I don't want to minimize at all the achievement that these AI researchers made. But I think we have to also realize that it wouldn't have been possible without that data. The problem is that this kind of high quality data becomes rarer and rarer as you go from simple things like single proteins to more complex interactions, to cells, to tissues, to organs, all the way up to the whole body. Because at every one of those stages, the complexity, the number of molecules, the number of unknowns just goes up insanely. And so even with a general intelligence, we wouldn't be able to really do anything to kind of predict what happens on the bigger scales without the data. And that's what's going wrong with these clinical trials. The biggest part of clinical trials is trying to figure out, does this drug work in the body? That means that we can't expect an AI model to just be able to simulate what happens in the entire body based on just what we know about the molecular level. The molecular level is just way more simple than the full human body. To figure out what's happening on these bigger scales, we would need to do a lot of experiments, probably over a much longer time, to really be able to understand them, and then to make the data that would be used for AI models to then be able to simulate them. But as it stands, we have a lot more data about the simple stuff than the more complicated stuff, which is why AI really helps at the top of the drug discovery funnel, where it's more about trying to figure out how molecules will interact, versus the bottom, which is more about the safety and efficacy across the whole human body. This is one of the points made in a great paper called How AI Can and Can't Cure Cancer. And it's a point that I think maybe I didn't understand, and perhaps other more tech enthusiast people might not understand, because they haven't really grappled with the complexity of biology before. So I really appreciated having this pointed out. I should disclose something quickly though. So this paper was written by a researcher at the Future of Life Institute, and the Future of Life Institute is now supporting my videos. But all of these opinions are my own from reading the paper myself. Like, the Future of Life Institute didn't look over the script or anything like that. But I still thought I should just mention it. Anyway, if you do want to check out that paper, there is a very flashy website for it. One thing I learned from reading it is that the quality of data in medicine is actually pretty bad. So like the best sort of long-term health data that we have often comes from like health records, but those health records aren't really designed to, help like figure out what's happening to the patient over time. They're really mostly there for billing data. And so that's just not that useful. And the extent of data that we have on most patients is just like from standard blood tests, which barely scratch the surface of all of the crazy stuff happening in the human body. Not only that, the paper pointed out that there is actually quite a replication crisis in medicine itself. So you might have heard of the replication crisis in other fields where a researcher will see a result from one of their colleagues and then go to try and replicate it, and they just don't get the same result. Now, the reason why this has become so common is because there's a lot of pressure in research to publish positive results. So if you were to test out some sort of drug or intervention and you found no result whatsoever, you generally wouldn't be able to publish that, which hugely skews the kind of results that do actually get published. But having high quality data is absolutely critical if we want AI to help us with medicine. I mean, remember that Incilico medicine was only able to speed up the target discovery by mining high quality omics data that already existed. But if this data is so critical, then why isn't there more of it? I think the problem might come down slightly to the incentives in science where, there isn't that much reward for just collecting a huge amount of data and making it available for everyone. That's why the Protein Data Bank was such an amazing project. It's also kind of rare. But there are some projects like this that have been doing an incredible job. One of them is the UK's Biobank. This is an incredible not-for-profit project which started in around 2008 and collected data from more than 500,000 people and is going to follow those same people for up to 30 years. These volunteers have given all kinds of data to this study, including, samples like blood samples, doing all kinds of state-of-the-art medical tests, and also answering questions about their life and lifestyle. So much emphasis in this AI for medicine stuff is focused on making general intelligences like ChatGPT better, but I honestly don't really think that that's the best use of our resources. You see, a single data center might cost in the billions, but a single research study like the UK Biobank would only cost in the hundreds of millions. And that data is so much more valuable when it comes to AI for medicine. You see, with AI drug discovery, you might say, oh, well, we'll just wait until we have, super intelligence, and then that will solve everything. That will just be able to simulate the whole human body. But it can't, because we don't even know a lot of the basic facts about how the body works. To be able to do that, you need to get data. Well, then you might say, oh, well, that's fine because the superintelligence will, come up with all these robots to do all of these experiments. But the thing is, experiments on biological organisms are rate limited by biology. You have to wait a certain amount of time for things to happen in a body or in a cell, and you can't rush those things. And so if we don't start to prioritize that sort of study, not only are we misallocating resources, we're losing time that we're not going to get back. Hey, before you go, can I tell you about a charity that means a lot to me? It's called FarmKind, and their mission is to end the cruelty that's involved in factory farming. Take, for example, the life of the average egg-laying hen. She'll live in a tiny, cramped cage, smaller than the size of an iPad, for the entirety of her life. This is completely unacceptable and unnecessary. But in 2008, only 2% of US hens lived cage-free. But now that number is up all the way to 40%. And that only happened because of the work of dedicated charities like the Humane League. The Humane League estimates that it only takes about 85 cents to ensure that a hen doesn't live this atrocious life. Now, what FarmKind does is it finds charities like the Humane League that are doing an incredible and cost-effective job to save animals, and it takes your money and gives 100% of those donations to those charities. So they do the hard work of finding the most cost-effective solutions for ending factory farming. I've talked about FarmKind on this channel before, and you guys blew me away with how much you did for those animals. And so this time I want us to be even more ambitious. That's why I've set a 3-month goal for our community to raise $21,000 together. So that's $7,000 each month. Now, I know that that's a really ambitious target, but that doesn't mean that you need to give a massive amount of money. I'd rather that you gave a comfortable amount every month, like let's say $12 a month, because every month that goes through, that will count towards our goal. And in the end, that usually adds up to more, but at a more manageable rate. If you want to help achieve this together, then I'd be so grateful, and the link is in the description below.